Hello and welcome to In the Spotlight, where we shine a light on entrepreneurs, SMEs, and innovators. I'm Maxine Crow, your host, and I am joined this morning by the lovely Sheryl Miller. I call her our global warrior for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Good morning, Sheryl. How are you?
Morning. I don't know why I'm doing jazz hands, Maxine.
I know, I know.
You know what? It feels so weird though to be in somebody else's live studio. It's great. It's great. No, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, and I almost didn't make it, as you know. When you sent me that message, I was on a sun lounger by the pool. But
Yeah, the stream is great though. So I'll keep you for about 30 minutes, and the audience can get to learn all about you. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I know you won't mind me sharing, but for our audience, if you are interested in like career pivots and changes, our wonderful Charlotte, I'm sure she'll tell you, used to actually be a qualified accountant and a real force in terms of financial planning, strategy, and transition. So we'll probably touch on a little bit of that.
yeah,
And
what a pivot.
yeah, absolutely. So and that brings us into our first question, actually, Cheryl. So please tell us about yourself and your career.
Do you know what's really interesting? So obviously, when we were in the studio, you showed me that magazine, which I guess we'll get into. So first of all, I want to borrow a saying from somebody that you know actually, the guy that runs Dent, Daniel
Oh,
Priestley. One of the things I remember him tweeting probably a couple of years ago, he basically said, "The life that you're living now is as a result of the decisions you made 5 years ago." And I know it's something that he says quite a lot. And I don't know whether you remember, but we went on a retreat. I'm going to say I think it was in 2014 to Portugal,
I
and
remember.
when you're taken out of your everyday space, you really get clarity, moments of clarity, and you get headspace. And it was then, I would say it was then that I really first envisioned a very significant shift from where I was at the time, which, as you say, was kind of like in finance. So, chartered accountant, trained with EY in Birmingham many years ago. Still love EY, but I was kind of in that world of finance, strategy, commercial stuff. Um, but I always loved the people element of what I did anyway. So I always loved kind of like working with people, getting best out of people, and all of that
Mm.
stuff, and almost like the sort of partnering with the business. And I was starting to do a lot more mentoring and working with Prince's Trust, young
Yeah.
people and individuals wanting to make changes in their career and all that sort of stuff, kind of naturally. And I would say it was in 2014. I don't know if you remember, but there were books in the room, and there was the book Eat That Frog,
I
which I
remember. Yeah, yeah.
uh, honestly, and it kind of just a lot of things just came together, and it really made me reflect on what is it that I really love doing, where is it, what is it that people come to me for? I always sort of say to people, actually, what's your zone of genius? What is
Mm.
the thing that people come to
I
you
love
for?
that.
And
I
I
love
sort of
that.
it just started to kind of make sense. And as I say, when you're in a space where you've got the headspace and you have those moments of clarity, you can start to move towards this thing. And so it was really then, back in 2014, I think I started to see a different future, more of helping individuals and small businesses and that kind of thing. And that was really what sort of then led me to, sort of some of the incarnations to where we are now, really. And I guess in terms of the work that I do now, I still love working with small businesses, with entrepreneurs, and more medium-sized businesses as well. So I don't know if that answers up to a point. I can
Yeah,
talk about how I got into the diversity field.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, also you have a reboot as well, so
Yeah.
we mustn't forget about that side. So just tell us a little bit about that,
Yeah.
and then we'll get into the
Yeah.
diversity piece.
I think so. How Reboot came along, so building on from that, wanting to help individuals, entrepreneurs, etc. Particularly from, so I used to be a mentor for the Prince's Trust. So anybody that knows of the Prince's Trust as an organisation, one of the programs that they have is the Enterprise Program, and it's basically where young people are loaned money to go and make a business. Prince's Trust has been doing it for a long time. I mean, obviously it's now the King, but it's still called the Prince's Trust. And I used to I mentored quite a few young people for a number of years. And I guess I saw some of the challenges that those individuals kind of went through, whether it was pivoting from a career, from a 9 to 5 into that space, or just some of the challenges of actually making things happen. So having great ideas, but not knowing how to make it happen. And so that then led me to a couple of sort of businesses and ideas, but I ended up at Reboot, which was, okay, so when people are really at that crossroads in their career and they maybe want to do things that are more fulfilling, how do you help take them through that journey of discovery of what am I really about? How do I make these things happen? How do I kind of step into a new space? And that's kind of how Reboot was born. It was about rebooting, rebooting your vision, your passion. I think especially as we get, a little bit older in our years, sometimes we look back at a career, even if it appears to be really successful from the outside, and people aren't always fulfilled by it. So that was also one of the drivers, probably a reflection of myself. I was in this finance kind of like, high flying kind of career, but maybe not as fulfilled, and just wanted to kind of lean into, I guess, what I thought I was put on the earth to do, which was to help other people, in their own journeys, basically. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. And I cannot wait for your next Reboot retreat.
It's literally speak. Yeah. That's part of the reason for kind of getting away and getting some headspace, was to be able to, to get the headspace to kind of create, to decompress from some of the stuff that I've been doing, and to create, to get back into that space of being able to help people. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So that leads us onto our next question, Sheryl, with the diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how and when did you decide to make that shift, and what drove you to be a force in this space of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah. Do you know what? It was kind of, I would say it was a natural evolution, but I think if you ask certain people that know me really well, they've actually said it was probably my calling, but I probably didn't realize. So how the evolution sort of happened is, so obviously I wrote the book. So I started writing the book, Smashing Stereotypes, in around sort of 2017 is when I first kind of, had the inklings of it. And it's because I knew that I was kind of coming to the end of my corporate career.
Yeah.
And, I used to have a lot of people sort of say, how have you done that? As often the only Black woman in rooms, what about, how have you kind of gotten to where you've gotten to in your career? So I knew I wanted to write the book, started writing the book, started fleshing it out in 2018, really leaned into it in 2019.
Yeah.
And so the book really was about, so it's Smashing Stereotypes, how to get ahead when you're the only blank in the room. And so the book was about, my tips for how to do that when you feel like you are the minority, the only voice, etc. And what that then basically did, and I wasn't really even necessarily expecting it, but then organizations started asking me to come and talk to them about, my experiences, but then also how they could create an environment for, individuals from, I guess, historically marginalized backgrounds to thrive, to progress, etc. And so that was kind of like 2019 that started to happen. Obviously, then 2020 happened with George Floyd, and it just kind of blew up. Like it literally just sort of took off. And so it was almost just like a merging of things. And but as I say, a lot of people have said to me, it's actually my calling, because when I was in the corporate space, I was very comfortable talking to people at all levels of the organization, so influencing into the boardroom, but also, because when you're involved in big projects and big programs, you have to be able to bring everybody along with you.
Yeah.
There's something about the skills, I guess, that I've developed in that change management experience, combining that with my understanding of what it took to get ahead, when you are that minority, and actually, really researching that around the book, and you sort of bring the two together, and it kind of landed in this space around DE&I, which I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah.
Thank you. And what were the highlights when you were moving into the space of diversity? What were the highlights for you for developing your solution, and what you were going to bring to the table?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think some of the highlights have just been shaping the solutions and actually shaping what it is that I can do for companies to help them move along that journey. Um, I think what's quite interesting, and having worked with a lot of consultants in the space of transformation, and I'm not going to draw any of them out, but often when you're in that space and you're working with the big consultants, a lot of it can feel very cookie cutter.
Mm,
Very you almost just sort of like find and replace the name of the client on the slides, and you just change the name, and it's the same stuff that gets rolled out to every client. And sometimes you see that has drawbacks, and different companies need different things. So I think one of the things I've really loved is kind of, having a framework that I can take
mm,
to different clients that I know works, but really creating tailor-made solutions and then seeing them come to fruition and seeing them make a difference. So one of the highlights, just as an example, I was doing some work with a client where, it's a founder-led business, about 50 people in their organization, not very diverse, by their own standards, not very diverse.
yeah,
And one of the things I love is, I work with people wherever they are in their journey, as long as they are willing, as long as they're wanting to make change.
yeah,
I did a session around inclusion and, how do you create an environment where people can just be themselves, whatever background they're coming from.
yeah,
And the feedback I had afterwards from the HR director was, after that session in one of the forums, somebody had disclosed that they had a hidden disability. And, the MD and the founder really was just really celebrating that they had felt empowered enough to do that. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
And it really started this movement of, this is what it looks like when you can be yourself, when you can bring, it's kind of like your authentic self into work. So that's kind of just one of the moments that sort of just jumps out at me, and kind of just really sort of spurs you to keep going, really,
yeah.
to keep that helping. Yeah.
Yeah. That's an absolutely amazing story, and people always see the physical disabilities, but forget about the neuro and diverse. So it is really prevalent in the workplace,
Yeah.
and in society now.
Yeah.
Okay, so this question is all around challenges. So what has been your biggest challenge?
I think in terms of, from the perspective of building a business, anybody that knows me, so obviously my background is finance, right? So the numbers and strategic planning. So I can sort of do the detail in the numbers, but actually my thing more is big picture thinking. Um, one thing that I'm not very good at, in terms of, I always say I'm not good at this, as an entrepreneur, I hate sales. I hate selling. So actually, and you might know this actually, because we formed a little bit of an accountability group, I remember. And what was good about that is that somebody else in that accountability group was able to share with me, some tips around
Yes.
business development and what that looks like. That's been one of my challenges. I mean, luckily, I think something like that as a challenge when you're starting out as a business, or when you're trying to build and grow a business, you've got to find a way of doing it still that is authentic to you. You've got to lean
Yeah.
into the discomfort of it. So I had to lean into, maybe the discomfort of a cold approach or a lukewarm approach,
Yeah.
into a potential client, but do it in a way that's authentic to you.
Yeah.
So I've realized I cannot do the hard sell. I don't do the hard American style sell. It's just not me. Where you basically sell to somebody and then they're almost like left feeling that you've kind of pulled one over them. I just can't do that. So
Yeah.
for me, one of the reasons that I love doing things like the LinkedIn Lives and putting out content on LinkedIn, I love this type of, I'm not even going to call it selling, but I love connecting with people. I
Mm.
love, letting people see and hear what it is, what I'm about and what I can potentially do. And if they like it, and this is what tends to happen, they tend to reach out to me, and then we have a conversation about how I can work with them. So that's
Yeah.
probably one of my biggest challenges, finding an authentic way of, of growing the business. Yeah.
Yeah. Just another tip for you there. Someone actually said to me that selling is like a relationship, so people buy from people they know. So I mean, for the audience, every Friday morning 8:30, and also there's recordings of Sheryl covering diversity talks, inclusion talks. Some amazing guests have been on the show, and I'm sure afterwards you can tell us how the audience can actually see some of your material and enjoy some of the talks that you've done. Okay, so another question for you now. Before I'm going to let you go back to the sun in a moment. So I promise. So what do you feel the future trends in our industries, and how can we prepare for change?
I mean, diversity, equity, equality, inclusion, belonging, the trends. I mean, the trends are moving faster than, I can't even say what, it's like faster than the speed of sound, basically. It's moving so
Wow.
quickly. I do think so. So the one thing I would say about this industry in terms of, D&I, diversity and inclusion, etc., you've got a lot of people have kind of just jumped in the industry, especially since 2020. And so with that comes, you have got, lots of different types of skill sets within the industry. And I'm actually going to be doing a live in a couple of weeks with somebody talking about this, about how the industry has evolved and how you find the right person that you want to work with. Because I think one of the biggest trends in this space is, first of all, being up to speed with, kind of like the latest thinking, current trends. The research is fast evolving. So you've really got to be on it. You've got to, you've got to really be quite well read. You've got to constantly be scanning, because if we were to get into something like even say gender and, gender identity and transgender issues, for example, there's something out this week about Caster Semenya and, the discrimination that she faced as an athlete and all of those sorts of things. And also the law around it is changing. So the legislation is changing constantly. So I think, those are some of the biggest trends, really. How do you stay up to date? And I've got something cooking at the moment. I'm cooking some training for internal practitioners. And I get a lot of internal, HR leads and people that run staff networks that reach out to me and say, how can I stay up to speed with what's going on? And so I'm cooking something around that, and there are other people like me that are out there that run training in this area. But yeah, you've got to stay abreast with what's going on. The other trend I think I would say is more around, I'm not going to call it a backlash against diversity, equity and inclusion, but you've got to be, I think the level of emotional intelligence for people that are doing this work internally, we've got to up our game, because it's not a case of people are just sort of saying, oh yeah, everything's unfair to people from minoritized backgrounds and therefore, we've got to do this, that and the other. Companies are now realizing that, you've got to look at the benefits to all groups, and it's got to be done in quite an inclusive way. So you've got to be really tuned into that. It's not as blunt as it was previously, and it's not just the moral case around equity and equality. You've got to also understand the business case, and it's got to be fair to everyone.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I could listen to you talk about this topic all day, all day long. So let's dig a little bit deeper. And who inspires you?
That's a really difficult one, and I feel that it's so hard to just put one in, because I draw inspiration from so many different things. I mean, to be honest, first, Maxine, you, in terms of, I always say to you, you're like an energizer bunny, right? If anybody wants motivation, right?
Oh, I've just lost you.
What have you been doing? So I get inspiration from all areas, really. This is going to sound a bit of a strange one, but rather than anybody that's famous, because there are all these people out there. Okay, let me list a few. In terms of entrepreneurship, right? I love Richard Branson's books, right? I'm just putting it out there. Love his books in terms of the entrepreneur's journey, particularly somebody that maybe struggles with focus, because that's something I struggle with, and that's something Richard Branson struggles with. And then Oprah Winfrey, just for her pursuit of, finding what she calls, your supreme moment of destiny. You're finding your true path. I think she's phenomenal at that. But then finally, you know, my grandmother who passed away a few years ago. The reason I call her my inspiration, I would say that the turning point. So when she passed away, and it's not a morbid story, but she was very contented in her last few, you know, months, weeks, and days. Very, very content, and really, you know, one of her lasting lessons to me, first of all, about, you know, kind of like being at peace, and a lot of that was down to her faith, really. But the other thing was not needing to have, you know, material things to be happy. And I'm still learning that lesson. It's something that I'm still kind of like, sort of like, you know, sort of struggling with. But, you know, she lived a very modest life, but was incredibly happy. And so, yeah, and especially I think as an entrepreneur, as a business person, you know, remembering that it's not just about, you know, the dollar and all of that stuff. That's one of the lessons that I try to take from her.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. You did say that you've got something cooking, and that's actually my next question. What can we look forward to from you in the coming weeks and months?
Yeah, I have got something cooking. If anybody's been watching, seeing my activity on LinkedIn in the last couple of weeks, they'll have seen me talking a lot about support for internal, you know, people that are doing this work internally, because I get a lot of calls. Sometimes I feel a little bit like the therapist couch when I get HR directors or you know, internal diversity and inclusion champions and people that run staff networks. And so what I'm cooking at the moment, I'm cooking training for individuals that run these staff networks. So individuals who typically do this on the side of their desk, you know, they volunteer because they're passionate about it, and they say, look, you know, I want to help to create change in this space. And so they volunteer to run, you know, it might be a diversity council or a diversity committee or an employee resource group or an affinity network, you know, the LGBTQ plus network or the race and ethnicity network. And I'm pulling together some training for specifically for that group. And it's going to be, there'll be some online stuff, but this is where Reboot meets DE&I, because I'm going to take it residential. So I'm going to do some residential training for leads of those groups so that they really get that restorative, you know, resilience building that's needed, but also you know, the tools, the techniques to deliver change in that space, to get leaders to buy into what you're doing, to get the sponsorship, to influence across the organization. So really, you know, there'll be some guest speakers and some surprises, but they're going to get the best of, you know, my sort of like DE&I experience and background, and some other colleagues that hopefully will jump on, as well as my change management experience of bringing the two together in a transformative residential setting. It's going to be amazing. Yeah.
And those residential places, for the audience, you will not be disappointed. It's absolutely brilliant. Okay, so what lessons can you share for other entrepreneurs, SMEs, and innovators?
Do you know what? This is a tricky one. I think the one thing I would say is there is something about sticking at, you know, the path that you've chosen, and definitely pursuing a course of action and being consistent enough to know whether that thing is working before you pivot, you know, before you move on to something else. Because I think even for myself, you know, when I look at some of the ventures that I've done in the past, and they've not all worked out, you know, not everything has been a rip-roaring success. And sometimes I do wonder almost like whether I'd move too quickly to the next thing. But, you know, Reboot and the work I'm doing now, I've been at this now for a good, you know, 3-4 years. And I think the one thing I've learned is, you know, more consistency, more sticking at it, you know, until you've seen the fruits. And only when you've been doing it long enough to know that maybe the winds are changing should you think about pivoting. But definitely allow yourself long enough to see results, you know, rather than just kind of flitting off to the next thing. So sticking at it, you know, the consistency, I think is really important. Yeah.
And also, I think depending on what industry or what business, service, or product an entrepreneur's developing, creating, it's not going to happen overnight. In some cases, we can't all have a unicorn, you know, at the offset. That's some really great advice, Sheryl.
One of the things that I just add into that as well, you know, because we you know, when we're on this sort of journey, we read books, we listen to podcasts, we do all of that stuff. There's something about, I think, once you find something, you know, a formula or an approach, again, you know, use that approach. So I tell you what's really interesting, as I've been developing this new training that I'm going to be sort of rolling out for these leads, and I needed to kind of tweak the website. Do you know what I went back to? I went back to the book 24 Assets, because I know that in that book, right, it's a book by Daniel Priestley. Again, shout out Daniel Priestley, because his methodology for entrepreneurship and for growing and scaling is probably amongst the best that I've seen in terms of practical, actionable steps. So I went back to that book to kind of like think about, okay, how do I structure that in terms of, you know, the products, the service, the price points, all of that. Kind of went back and thought, I just need to refresh on that. And to, you know, and I read a lot of books.
Yeah, I know.
And I don't go back to many books. So when I go back into a book, you know that it's because I know that that framework really works, you know, and you know, when I used to do mentoring and stuff, I would recommend that book all the time, mentoring entrepreneurs. So yeah, finding an approach, you know, so not trying too many different things, but finding that approach. If you know it works and you can see it and you've seen it work for others, you know, sticking with it and really leaning into it. So that's what I was doing this morning.
Amazing. So Sheryl, we're coming to the end of this session with you, and it's been absolutely brilliant hearing your insights. You can just hear I can feel the energy coming from you. Give me some of that sun from where you're vacating. So how can the audience and anyone that wants to listen to this recording afterwards, how can we access your services?
Yeah, so obviously, I guess, you know, I live on LinkedIn from a social media perspective. You will find the odd profile on Instagram or Twitter, but really I live on LinkedIn, and that's where I like to converse. You know, that's where I really like to have a conversation. So, you know, there's my stuff on LinkedIn. I have got a YouTube channel as well. Yay! So people binge out on the content. I started on Maxine's advice. I've uploaded a lot of the content on YouTube as well. And then obviously there's the website, reboot.global. Where people can go to kind of find out more about what it is that they do. But generally, you know, how this generally starts is often actually companies often send me a message and they say, you know, they often say something's happened. And what they mean by that is, you know, somebody said something at work that they shouldn't have said to somebody, and somebody's been offended or something. But yeah, there's all different ways of reaching out to me. But, you know, always happy to have a free half-hour chat with somebody to kind of find out what issues they've got going on and how I can help them, basically.
Oh, thank you, Sheryl. Do you have any last words for our audience? Any words of wisdom? Any golden nuggets? So tell us something.
Yeah. I mean, I think from like the one nugget. So obviously I'm away at the moment, and I'm kind of working remotely, but I'm taking it to the extreme because I'm across the other side of the world, literally. But the one nugget I would give, I think, particularly for individuals, first of all, individuals who are working in DE&I, like I see you, right? Because I see how stressed out they are, how challenging it is when you're doing this work internally. And so I hope that if you are working in that space, that you're winding down to your summer holidays and you are planning to take a break. And I'd say the same for entrepreneurs. So I've now been away for almost 2 weeks, and I would say it took the first week just to decompress, from all of the projects and all of the noise that's going on. Then it took the second week to get some things off the to-do list that needed to be off the to-do list. And it's only now going into the third week that I'm having the headspace now to create. And there is something about take those long breaks. You know, if you need them, take those long breaks, because it really does take the time to wind down, clear your head, create the headspace for what I call the moments of clarity, you know, so that you can then start to create. And I think that's really important. First of all, for those DE&I practitioners who are battling, and I don't say that lightly, you know, battling away to make change in their organizations, but also for the entrepreneurs that are battling away at their businesses, because building businesses is hard work, right? And you're usually at it 24/7. But I would just sort of say, be sure to take the breaks, you know, because your business, you know, will be better for it, and the change that you're trying to make will be better for it as well.
Oh, thank you, Sheryl, so much. This has been In the Spotlight with Sheryl Miller, our global diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm not even going to call you a consultant. You are a warrior. You are a force for change. Oh, it's been absolutely lovely having you on. Really has been, and looking forward to speaking with you very, very soon. So for the audience, you can contact Sheryl on LinkedIn. Just reach out. You can see her weekly live LinkedIn lives, all topics and guests, great guests that she has on every week. And I will be sharing this with you all later. So thank you so much.
Thanks again, Max. See you soon.
Bye.